and welcome to this stream. Yeah, first stream of 2025. We're going to be doing a playthrough of Witch on the Holy Night. I hope everyone had a great uh, holiday season and a good new year. I know I sure did. All right, well, let's just jump right into it. It was a winter's day 8 years ago. That solemn morning when she understood the value of life for the very first time. Her home was nestled on the side of a mountain. Around it was nothing but inhospitable wilderness. She had no neighbors or childhood friends to speak of. Things like traveling to school or playing outside were more trouble than they ought to be. Indeed, with its pure water and bright stars, it was a place rich with memories, both frustrating and halcyon? I'm not sure what that one was. No. That was only during summer, though. Winter in those mountains were extremely frigid, each morning more severe than the last. Her father would drive her to the train station. After waiting 10 minutes for the engine to warm up, the iced-over windows to clear.
キーを回してきてくれるかい?
Her father would savor his morning coffee, leaving her to venture outside and rev the engine. Out the front door, she would go, traversing the garden with icy breath until she reached that old sedan. As always, she inserted the key, then started the ignition. The engine rumbled to life. Just as she proudly finished that humble task she'd done so many times before. Oh shit! A shrill scream pierced the air. She knew, even though it wasn't human, that the feeble sound was a cry of agony. A few moments passed. Her father came out and opened the hood of the car, checking fan belts. A monstrous-looking engine. And something that didn't belong. There was a cat, a mother by the looks of it, and her 2 kittens. 3 cats had been huddling for warmth in the engine's compartment. The mother cat was missing its head. Aww! But the kitty! One of the kittens had been mangled beyond recognition by the engine belts and surely died instantly. The other kitten, its face half covered in blood, panted faintly. It desperately clung to its mother, or rather the chunk of meat that had been its mother, with the last bit of life it could muster.
かわいそうに。
Her father lamented their plight. The previous night had been especially cold. After he had returned home yesterday, the cats must have snuck under the hood, drawn by the warmth of the engine. They had slept next to the engine and awoke to a storm of spinning belts. Cars in the 80s were not settled particularly well, so it was not unheard of.
いいんだ。が悪いんじゃないんだよ。
Her father's voice seemed distant. She could only make out a small tuft of the kitten's gray fur. The rest of it was caked in the blood of its mother and brother. I can see its skull. The fragile life of a speckled kitten. Trembling and possibly blind, it continued to nuzzle against its dead mother's chest.
待ちなさい。
She took the kitten into her arms and ran deep into the mountains to her grandfather's house. Was it because she was overcome with regret? Or was it the shock of grief years later? She still wasn't sure. Fighting back the welling tears, she burst into her grandfather's workshop. Her grandfather was a magician who could do anything. She had never seen magic. She knew that magic was a fantasy straight out of fairy tales. But so was her grandfather. She had to find him. He was the only one that could help.
その子猫の運命を変えろという。
The cave-dwelling magician said indifferently. The kitten needs our help, she pleaded. Whether it was a simple task or a Herculean labor, her grandfather would not say. He simply granted the girl's childish wish like a machine. Oh no, the girl said. Before she knew it, however, she was holding a tiny corpse in her hands. Its fur was cold. The warmth of life had left its body. And the tears she had fought so hard to hold back poured from her eyes. Regret spread through her chest like an endless gray sky.
トロだったな。結局元に戻すとは。
Her mind struggled to come to grips with what had just occurred. The last 10 minutes were a total blank. Who she met, what she had known, it was all as if it never happened. The only thing she was sure of was that life, once extinguished, can never return.
そこに誰かいるの？
That day, it was her mistake that gave birth to me. Indeed. What could have occurred that day was a day of nostalgia and longing. Hey there, cat person, how you doing? Hope you're having a good day. This is a fairy tale of 8 years ago. The day they first met, that no magic can ever bring back. Oh, I'm sorry work sucks today. It's unfortunate. Arrogant, greedy, able only to destroy. I must be a wolf. Wait, what? I don't have regrets. There's no looking back. If my pride has left you behind, my sincere condolences. But at any rate, I suppose it's my fate to die at the hands of Little Red Riding Hood. All right, I'm a little confused. It was a quiet morning. Aspirates on the mirrors. Awesome. Oh, shit. That's just grand. Oh, what a pain. I'm sorry. I'm only kind of sorry. Better you than me. That's all I got. From her bed, she could see the sky was an ashen watercolor gray. The thermometer displayed 43 degrees Fahrenheit, a rather unforgiving temperature for November. Her stomach woke her up with a growl, pathetically reminding her that she had completely missed breakfast. But lazy mornings like today were, for her, a blessing. It was already well past 8 in the morning. On an ordinary weekday, tardiness would be unavoidable, but today, classes were canceled in commemoration of the school's anniversary. Nice. Wish that happened for me. That would have been really nice if once a year the school got closed because, it was the school's anniversary. That would have been cool. Oh, hardcore. That's rough. I'm totally not surprised though. That cat person. That's just that has a habit of happening. It's really funny though. 2 days in a row. Uh, Again, better you than me. I'm not. I'm only. I'm sorry that you had to deal with it, but I'm not sorry that it wasn't me. Uh, Grateful she had the intention of taking it easy for the first time in ages. Outside the window was a gloomy gray, and it reminded her of. Wait, it reminded her more of evening than morning. Wow, I'm having trouble with my words today. It was a pleasant morning by any stretch of the imagination, but having been up all night until just 3 hours ago, she couldn't care less about the weather outside. All she cared about was more sleep. Well, can we blame her? 3 hours and then wake up to rainy, gray-ass day? I want more sleep too. Oh. As long as she could spend her morning in bed, what was happening outside was of no concern to her. He shut the curtains. Yep, out of sight, out of mind. Love it. Then closed her eyes and tried to let sleep reclaim her.
せめてあと2時間ぐらいは凡庸な夢を見ていられますように。
Blissful slumber found her soon enough. Her consciousness faded. However, her simple request would be mercilessly refused. Damn phone. A faint but shrill sound lingered in her ears. It was the unmistakable ring of a telephone. Much to her chagrin, her eyes popped open out of habit.
こんな日に限って。
The telephone was situated in the foyer on the first floor. Oh, how unfortunate. Answering it meant walking down a 30-foot corridor and going down a flight of stairs. Well, that's terribly inconvenient. Why don't you have a phone in your room, you silly person, you? In her sleep-deprived state, that distance seemed somewhere between incredibly far and astronomically far. The phone's incessant ringing continued. She knew the caller would eventually give up if she ignored it, but she chose to fight the urge. Well, guess we're going to answer the phone.
アリス出ないの？
Yeah, why doesn't Alice answer it? She thought her housemate would get it, but soon had to abandon all hope. The realization struck her that her housemate did not have the day off from school and was likely in class at her prestigious little hilltop academy. The caller proved incredibly persistent. That persistence made the volume of the ringing seem even louder.
もうせっかくの安眠を。
Oh, well, she was left with no choice but to get up, throw on a top, and leave the room. Aw, how terribly unfortunate.
うわ、寒。
Oh, that's even worse. If it's cold, go back to bed. They'll give up eventually. She rubbed her hands together to warm her numb fingers. The mansion's heating system was inadequate, to say the least, which meant that winter was the very worst of uninvited guests. Never more so than on a dreary morning as this, when one didn't need to use a thermometer to know how cold it was. The mansion sat in the mountains and was surrounded by dense forest. Winter always arrived here first before moving on to nearby towns. The robotic ring of the telephone reverberated through the long hallway. The mansion's furnishings had been so perfectly maintained that it made the place feel unlived. It seemed longer than it did splendid. Coupled with the dreary morning, it could have passed for a haunted house.
ま、幽霊屋敷そのものだけど。
Awesome!
だいたい2人で住むには広すぎるのよ、この家は。
All right, can we please get the phone? Whoever you are, character, get the damn phone already. She counted more than 30 rings since it first began. Or at least somebody's counting. The caller either had a lot of free time on their hands or had a good understanding of the house's circumstances. She had a strong hunch it was the latter. The window above looked out onto a gloomy sky. She hesitated to catch the unrelenting ring in the act as soon as possible. Though she had a feeling that her happy morning might come to a close the moment she caught it. It was here that a series of incidents began. Apologies for the lack of romance to this tale. For whether it be objectively true or merely supposition, it is always from gloomy and unassuming beginnings that extraordinary events are set into motion. Very nice music, I gotta say. Very soothing music, actually. I haven't read this one before, so this is going to be all new to me. I can only hope that when decision time comes, chat sees fit to not make terrible choices, because I'm the one that pays for them. Although I trust y'all. You guys will make good choices. I know you will. I mean, I do know some of the names of some of the characters in this one. I'm just not going to spoil it for anybody who doesn't know anything about it. The rain had subsided somewhat by the time she reached the school gate. Wait, why are we going to school when we don't have to? What's wrong with you? Sunlight seemed to be playing peekaboo behind the clouds in the distance. It looked like it might be cleared up by early afternoon.
と言っても、私には関係のない話だけど。
The weather reflected her luck. On top of being forced out of the house at such an early hour, she had to suffer through a winter rain. I'm getting a bad feeling about this. The sinking feeling she had only grew as she passed through the entrance and headed inside. She didn't encounter any other students along the way, nor did she see anyone taking part in club activities either. The reception desk to the faculty room simply read, "Faculty closed." The school had given all of its students the day off, except those explicitly summoned, like her. A fact that irked her more and more as the minutes passed. So she opened the door to the faculty room and headed toward the desk she had visited a number of times before. The man at the desk wore a plain shirt and suit that were nonetheless neatly pressed. Slim framed glasses adorned his face, giving off an amicable yet cunning air. The mild-mannered image this mid-20s man presented clashed with the cigarette he smoked. He didn't appear to have noticed her yet.
山城先生。
She closed the door with a bang. Showing no response to the student, Mr. Yamashiro lifted his head.
やあ、おはよう、青崎くん。要件は聞いているかな？
はい。1時間前に自宅で、事前に何の相談もなく。
Having graduated from this high school himself, Mr. Yamashiro was not much older than the rest of the students. For that reason, the students preferred him over the other teachers. He always had something interesting to talk about and kept conversations casual. In fact, he seemed more like an older student than a teacher. But she unfortunately didn't share her fellow students' fondness for him. She was of the opinion that teachers should come across as more austere. Like an iron fist that could inspire both love and hate in equal measure. Not a buddy to joke and pal around with. He was the exact opposite of how she felt a teacher should be. It was only natural that her manner towards him be forced and unfriendly. Not that she'd ever been weird to make friendly small talk.
はあ、今日もご機嫌斜めみたいだね、君は。
それは先生の気のせいです。今日だけ特別という話ではありませんから。
Matter-of-fact answer perfectly matched the displeasure displayed on her face. Her bad mood from having to get up early and the tiredness from staying up late must have collectively made her look positively adversarial.
そうならいいんだけどね。彼にはそう辛く当たらないでくれよ。僕らじゃ正直どう扱っていいかわからないところもあるし。
先生、その件ですけど、私 まだ詳しい話を聞かされていないのですが。
As Mr. Yamashiro met her piercing eyes, he finally understood the reason behind her tone and slowly put out his cigarette.
電話じゃあなんて聞いたの？
転入生の紹介をするとだけです。理由も脈絡もない説明でした。
One of Mr. Yamashiro's eyebrows stood up, impressed with the brevity of her answer. He could see that she was angry, not because she had been called to school on her day off, but because she hadn't been told why she was here. Mr. Yamashiro chuckled sympathetically.
先生、これが笑い話ならそろそろ帰っていいでしょうか？
いや、ごめん。謝るよ。冗談じゃなくて真面目な話なんだ。ちょっと君の手を借りたくてね。
本当に転入生の問題で？
訳ありというか難しいというか。彼、宗十郎くんと言うんだけど、ちょっといろいろとずれていてね。僕らが案内してあげるより同世代の君の方が適任だと思ったんだ。
Probably gonna have to remember that name. Crap. Or at least how to pronounce it. She threw him an unamused look. It was negligent of them to be pushing teacher's duties on her. She did wonder how exactly this transfer student, exactly this was peculiar. Maybe he meant the student had behavioral problems or was difficult somehow. But peculiar? She didn't have the slightest idea what that meant.
ずれてるなんてそう使わない表現だけど。
She had her doubts, but swept them aside for now. This wasn't the time to get distracted by more concerns. The fact remained that this conversation was all the peculiar she could handle, and she needed more information. She was already beginning to fantasize about saying no and curling up in her warm bed at home.
一つ質問があります。
何？学年は君と同じ2年生だよ。性格は落ち着きがあって人の話をよく聞くタイプ。裏を返せば覇気がないとも取れるけど、それならそれで付き合いやすいだろ。青崎くんとはクラスは違うけど、きっと仲良くな。
そういったことは本人から直接聞きますし、測ります。そうではなく、なぜ私なんでしょうか？
Yeah, none of that did answer her question. You can try, though. Though her tone was still stern, it was clear that she was willing to cooperate. She had decided to put her feelings of dissatisfaction aside and focus on the task at hand. Forcing herself to act empathetic in spite of her self-absorbed nature, she was something she was used to. Paradoxically, this force of will was also the reason teachers put so much faith in her. To a point. At times, that strength shattered expectations, and on those occasions, they were left with no choice but to treat it like a natural disaster and weather it until it passed. That was how Mr. Yamashiro had come to deal with her over the past year. Oh,
も
wow.
う一度だけ聞きます
That's rough.
山城先生。それでなぜ私なんでしょうか。
Persuaded by a question without a clear yes or no answer, he answered.
それはね。別に青崎くんが先生方に敬遠されているのと同じぐらい信頼されていて、学校のためなら教師も生徒も一緒くたに切って捨てる鉄の生徒会長だからじゃないよ。
それ以外にこんな呼びつけを受ける理由はないと思いますけど。
Her eyes did nothing to hide her disbelief as she glared at him. Strength far beyond that of an ordinary 17-year-old girl coupled with the youthful beauty of one. Mr. Yamashiro let slip a genuine smile, admiring the miraculous balance of qualities.
いや、責務だけでいいなら僕がやってるさ。この人選に関しちゃ教師や生徒会長といった役職も関係ないよ。なんていうか、こんな頼みを損得抜きで聞いてくれるのは君だけだと思ってね。適任ですからと強く推薦したわけ。
In other words, he knew she wouldn't say no.
山城先生。
うわ、怖っ。もう睨まない睨まない。言ったろ、僕にはともかく彼には笑顔でって。とまあ納得してくれたならすぐに移動しよう。もうずいぶん待たせてしまっているからね。それと雨の中ご苦労様。帰りはもちろん車で送るよ。
Mr. Yamashiro stood up gracefully. I'm good, thanks, she replied before turning and walking out of the faculty room. He had been waiting for about an hour. While he did, the rain shower lightened into a drizzle. His mind wandered as he listened to the sound of the raindrops. The room was filled with neatly arranged rectangular tables. He was the only one there. Quite some time had passed since he had been brought to this room and asked to wait. Even the best behaved student might have grown dissatisfied or anxious with the situation by now, but the boy stuck to his spot like a scarecrow. He was chilled to the bone. It was the end of November, and the low temperature in the morning had marked the start of winter. The room was not much warmer. The heater hadn't been turned on. Either he'd missed the teacher telling him to turn it on, or he'd never seen one in his life. He breathed lightly on his freezing fingers as he aimlessly surveyed his surroundings. This dreary place was apparently a meeting room. The other students might have considered it a wonderful place to meet, but to him it was drab and overly spacious. It was a lifeless place that reminded him of an arid cave. Stuck in this cold room was with absolutely nothing to do, his mind turned to what they wanted to discuss. Unable to come up with a solid answer, he returned his attention to the sound of the rain. The rain hardly resembled the rain in the mountains, though he could still recognize it, barely. The smell and sound were harsher, but at the end of the day, rain was still rain. So even in this world, alien as it was, could have something in common with mountains. That trivial detail perked him up a little. He liked how the town looked, soaked in rain. Naturally, he preferred sunny weather, but he liked rain in its own way. The fog from the rain had soaked up the scent of the soil, and it reminded him of home. It was at times like these that he was able to numb the anxiety the city gave him. But then he let out a discouraged sigh. How pathetic. He'd already been here 2 weeks, and thoughts of his hometown still made him sad. Perhaps feeling that he was being unfair to his new life, he composed himself and continued to wait patiently. As if having a passion for distractions, his attention returned to the sound of the rain once more. Waiting like this doesn't seem to be particularly hard for him. He quietly endured the numbing cold and the hour alone with calm, deep breaths. As the saying goes, good things come to those who wait. As a strong point of his or not, he was astonishingly patient. It was certainly helping him out in this moment. She, on the other hand, was livid. The profile of the transfer student had been explained to her on the way to the meeting room. She was told he had lived his whole life up in the mountains without any electricity. That meant more than half of civilized society would have been an utter mystery to him.
なんて絶望的な断絶。戦後どころか戦前の話じゃない。ロビンソンにも程がある。
Like Robinson Crusoe. Oh man, that's grand. She had every right to be angry. His village had apparently remained isolated in the mountains for many years. Contact with the villages in the foothills of the mountains only occurred once a month or so, which was unfathomable in modern Japan. Although expressways and Japan Rail, the old national railways, now spanned the country like arteries, it wasn't entirely impossible for mountain villages like his to exist. But she couldn't imagine how someone born to such circumstances would think or live.
電気がないって、村に行き渡っていないだけで公衆電話ぐらいはあったんですよね。
なかったそうだよ。こっちに暮らすようになってまず驚いたのが電話だそうだし。電話って便利ですねなんて真顔で言われてね。 そういえばそうだなぁと再確認させられたぐらいだよ。
She shot a sidelong glare his way as he laughed. Oh man, that's harsh. It seemed that the naivete of the country boy had cheered up Mr. Yamashiro a bit.
駐在もいないってことか。うちも実家は山奥ですから、電気が通っていないのはありえないとは言いませんけど。そいつ、学校も知らないんですか？
うん。どんなものかは知っていたそうだけど、実際来るのは今日が初めてらしい。それで緊張していたのかな。あまり会話も弾まなかった。ああいうのも野生児っていうのかな。狼に育てられた狼少年みたいな。あ、いや、探検隊の話だね。怖いな、青崎くん。冗談だって。そう睨まないでくれ。大丈夫。話してみた感じ、おとなしい子だったから。なんていうか、言葉の通じない小動物みたいな感じ？
山城先生、その例え、気休めになってませんから。
As he gave her blunt reply, she tried to simulate in her mind what life without electricity would be like. But the thought of it took her sour mood from bad to worse. Aww. Poor Awazaki. She's getting even madder about her situation. After all, it was a world she had never known. She could understand why the teachers had given up. She too wanted to give up and return to her warm bed, but her good-for-nothing pride was holding her hostage. Not only did the teachers believe she was up to the task, but she also believed she could do it. It wasn't that easy to go back on her word, no matter how bad things looked after the fact. She walked along the hallway, the rain pattering in the background. The meeting room was already in sight. With a furrowed brow, she fixed her long hair in anticipation of meeting the unknown stranger within. Her elegant strides were like those of a confident general going into battle.
いや、青崎くん、君を信頼してる僕だけど、念のため確認しておくよ。なんていうか、優しくね。できれば笑顔とか作れないかな。
作り笑いは苦手です。一応努力しているつもりですが。
ああ、そうなんだ。
So don't fake
それはよ
it,
かっ
just
た。
actually smile then.
いやー、ほんとよかった。青崎くんにも苦手なものってあったんだね。
Mr. Yamashiro's shoulders slumped the second they reached the meeting room. As he put his hand to the door, his eyes seemed to say to her, "Be nice, please." This only made her more irritated.
わかってるわよ。愛想が悪いってのは。でも笑顔なんて意識して作るものじゃないんだし。だいたいそういうインスタントな人付き合いなら飛び丸の方が向いてるって。
She sighed about her social shortcomings, but then it occurred to her that being called into school on a day off while sleep deprived wasn't anything to smile about anyway. She also thought the person responsible for this mess would be better off at attending elementary school. It might not be his fault, but neither was it her duty or obligation to do the teacher's work for them. At the very least, they could have used their brains and organized all this on a normal school day, another complaint she wanted to voice later.
いや、というか敵。なんであろうと敵。悪いけど、情状酌量以前に敵。
Harsh. Hate him and you haven't even met him yet. Holy crap.
間が悪いのはお互い様っていうか、ほんと、なんでよりにもよってこんな忙しい時に。
Her pounding headache from lack of sleep had bolstered her aggression by 10%. No matter how harmless the guy on the other side of the door may be, anyone who disturbed her sleep was the enemy. And just as she was reaching peak annoyance, Mr. Yamashiro opened the door to the meeting room. The room slowly slid into view. She didn't care for formalities. Just looked straight ahead and stormed into the room, and found herself face to face with the most unusual opponent. Before we go on, let's see from another perspective. Turning back the clock just a little. You won't have to do anything. For some, these words are a priceless luxury. For others, they're an unbearable torture. For the proactive girl, it was definitely the former, though she'd be too suspicious of the motives of anyone giving her such a gift to accept it. For the passive boy, it was definitely the latter, a bitter thorn that made him homesick, though at this very moment his mind was still distracted with the wait for his face to reveal any discontent. He maintained perfect posture as he stared at the gray sky. He had already waited a whole hour, but figured they must have had their reasons for making him wait. As long as he had the sound of the rain to soothe him, he could keep on waiting.
でもそろそろ9時を過ぎるのか。どうなんだろ
He had been vaguely keeping track of the time as he listened to the rain. Due to the holiday, the school building was completely silent, except for the patter of rain on the window. The mood felt as damp as the air. It was then he heard the heavy clatter of footsteps approaching.
う。よかった。忘れられているかと思った。
He could hear 2 steps of footsteps, one heavier set belonging to an adult. He breathed a sigh of relief as the door slid open.
すまないね。ずいぶんとお待たせしちゃって。
The first person he saw was a man wearing glasses and an awkward smile. That's Mr. Yamashiro, the one who brought me here.
ってあれ里中先生いないんですか？ひどいなあ。話し相手になってあげてと言ったのに。
Mr. Yamashiro scratched his head, looking increasingly apologetic. And then from behind him, with a tight-lipped expression that made it clear she didn't want to be there, a dark-haired girl with a determined look in her eyes appeared. Sojiro gulped. The sound of the rain on the window faded into nothingness. That's when he knew. This was how it felt when time stood still. She blinked quickly a few times, as if taken aback. Why was anyone's guess? The boy was everything she'd expected a naive country boy to look like. However, she felt something she couldn't understand. His eyes widened slightly as if taken aback. The reason was obvious. Putting his feelings into words was a different matter altogether, so we will never know exactly what he experienced in that moment. That's when it hit him. He sensed he'd been touched by the hands of destiny.
紹介するよ。彼が転入生の静木宗十郎くん。で、こっちの彼女が静木くんの案内役。うちの生徒会長で休日を押して新しい仲間の案内役を買って出てくれた青崎青子くんだ。
His voice and the sound of the rain seemed distant. This is how they first met. Such was their start, for better or worse, like the ephemeral beauty of fireworks. It was commonly believed among the students that Aoko was always in a foul mood. But this gossip was 90% prejudice, as Aoko simply didn't have time to be irritated 24/7. The reality was she simply didn't want to explain herself all the time, and therefore seemed angry about something, obvious or not. This idle gossip did, however, lead to her earning the title of one of the school's 7 deadly threats. The remaining 10% of the gossip was right on the mark. Aoko herself often had a hand in feeling that her tendency to feel animosity towards harmless things was akin to what a chronic headache sufferer might experience. Day fell under that 10%. For today her anger was pure, and her childish and selfish display was befitting her actual age. The meeting room was dimly lit to wash in the colors of the rain. To reduce electricity costs, the school regulations forbid the use of lights during the day. This was the setting the 3 of them found themselves in. Her first impression was that his calm demeanor reminded her of a field of wild flowers. In spite of his perfect posture, his overall air felt placid, even tame. And though describing him as meek would be going too far, At the very least, he was passive. Even through his uniform, she could see that he was thinner than average. His dark hair was unkempt, and he came across as a wholly forgettable boy. If she had to look at him in a more positive light, she would describe him more a young man than a boy. It was his calm demeanor that made him seem more mature. Was that the case of Aoko's reasonless reaction? He seemed almost too at home in this meeting room, and she was left with the impression that it was her and the teacher, not this outsider, who were the guests here. She felt an unidentifiable aggravation building within her, almost as if her right to be here was in question. Aoko felt herself raising her natural defenses.
信じられない。
Well, something really has set Aoko here off.
私、今わけもなく怒ってない。
She hated not understanding things, her own emotions in particular. It painted her less than you would imagine for a perfectionist like her, but still nagged at her like a thorn in her side.
いやーほら青崎くん挨拶してあげなくちゃ。
Mr. Yamashiro's attempt to relieve the tension was equally irritating.
挨拶？
After casting an assy glance in the teacher's direction, Aoko turned to face the boy. From an outsider's perspective, it might have looked like a stare down. And in that instant, the culmination of her emotional state hurled towards the innocent boy and skewered him.
Yeah, 待たせたね、しずきくん。
Hearing his name, Sojiro came to his senses. His stunned gaze shook loose. He took a deep breath to clear his head. Chalking it up to nerves, Mr. Yamashiro broke out a smile and turned to the girl standing beside him.
紹介するよ。彼が転入生のしずき宗十郎くん。で、こっちの彼女がしずきくんの案内役。うちの生徒会長で休日を押して新しい仲間の案内役を買って出てくれた青崎青子くんだ。
Having been introduced by Mr. Yamashiro, the girl took a step forward. Her eyes were merciless. Her stare an unspoken threat to violently trample her opponent. Sojiro, on the other hand, managed to keep his own composure despite the shock at how confrontational she appeared. He had never been greeted quite like this before, but supposed mistakenly that this was how people treated each other here in the city. The exchange must have looked quite dramatic to an onlooker. A girl ready to brawl. An earnest country boy desperate to understand. It was a murderous limbo, especially for anyone in the room with them. Like Mr. Yamashiro, for example. Well, he had thought he had made the right decision in choosing an honor student to help him out. She wasn't she was in an inexplicably bad mood, and the tension in the air was undeniable. It was in this moment he realized his failure. He realized he'd come the realization had come far too late. One false move, and this girl, for whom no problem was too large, would become a storm that would rock the very foundations of the school. Just as the almighty Joker card could bring either fortune or disaster, the sole teacher who had been present at the time would come to bear the blame for the scandal that ensued.
いけてる。二人とも気は合うようだね。
I wouldn't call it them hitting it off.
それじゃあ、僕はこの辺でいいかな。
Mr. Yamashiro laughed nervously as he crept towards the door.
僕は職員室にいるから、終わったら来るように。いいかい、青崎くん。くれぐれもだぜ。なんていうか、生徒会長としての度量の広さをこの際僕に信じさせてほしいかな。
Mr. Yamashiro left, leaving the two in a locked-eyed stare, in which one set of eyes was doing all the glaring. All that remained in the room was an artless... Hey! Get down, kitty! My cat's causing trouble. Silly kitty. And a crossed-armed, guarded girl. The two lingered in silence. They resembled shogi players agonizing over their first moves, though it was only Aoko who was reading so much into the situation. She decided to put her irritation aside for the time being. With no reason to feel revulsion for him in the first place. Hey! Get down! Stop it! Matt's trying to play with stuff on my nightstand and she's too far away to reach. With no reason to feel revulsion at him in the first place, she sighed deeply and faced Sojiro. Okay, enough! Right back, guys.
「まあいいわ。山城先生がヒルアンドンなのは今に始まったことじゃないし。それであなた名前は？
You mean you forgot already, Aoko? Damn. That's rough. Her tone was nothing if not reproachable, though he had done nothing to offend her. But the boy failed to pick up on it. Incapable of such venom himself.
ああ、静木宗十郎かな。君は青崎さんだったね。
For whatever reason, he came across as happy in his response.
さんはいいわ。柄じゃないから。こっちは静木くんでいい？
いいって何が？
だから呼び方。くんづけでいいかって聞いてるの。
Oh wow, she looks super grumpy. Holy crap.
何よ。 おかしなこと言った？私。
いや、すごく。
The boy replied immediately, as if it was a natural response, but quickly second-guessed himself.
いや、いいんだ。ごく一般的なんだろう。しずきくんで頼む。君は青崎でいいんだよな。
よろしく。
She followed her blunt reply with a swift turn away from him. While she was hardly thrilled at the prospect of the task at hand, it had been entrusted to her, and it was her personal policy to see it through to the end.
悪いけど、優しくしてあげる気はないから。時
Yeah,
間も
we
惜しいし、手
kind of
早
noticed
く
you're
行
not
く
in
わ
the
よ。
mood for pleasantries.
それは助かる。やっぱり時間は大切だ。
Aoko's blunt rancor was lost on him once again. And it's just irritating her even more. Oh, shit. Humans tend to be overly conscious about being ignored, whatever form that takes. But despite being peeved and landing none of her attacks, Aoko did her best to act professional and direct her guest into the hallway. There was no sunlight in the hallway, nor any sign of life. This was more like a prison than a cave. That was the meeting room. No, I wouldn't exactly call it a cave, but okay. As it dawned on Aoko that the hallway matched her mood, she sighed once again.
まず聞いておくけど、山城先生から聞いたことは理解してる？
ああ、学校の仕組みについては分かった。この建物全部に同い年の人間がいるなんてちょっと想像できないけど。
そう、よかったわね。
Aoko rubbed her forehead. This Sojiro kid had no idea what he was in for. Apparently, all he'd heard about school was that it was a place where a lot of people met to study. The high school teachers imparted to students their knowledge in various fields of study while fostering discipline and creativity. But never did Aoko imagine that she would have to explain the concept of school itself to someone. Yes, fundamentals were important, but this was absurd. She had serious doubts whether she could even handle classes, but Mr. Yamashiro insisted that things would work out somehow. Shojiro had managed to pass the transfer exam after all. Barely.
ま、私には関係ないけど。
Aoko grumbled mentally as she walked down the hallway. She consoled herself with the fact that today would be the only day she'd spend with this boy out of time, or at least she'd try to keep it that way.
青崎、
He asked calmly, trying to get her attention.
何？
こっちも一つ聞いていいかな。
だから何？
俺の気のせいだと思うんだが、君はまるで何かを睨んでいるように見える。やはり今朝は悪いものでも。
His gaze revealed earnest concern, as if asking her if she'd remembered to eat breakfast. Oh no! Oh no! Oh, she's really irritated now. It was like another hammer to her head. It was true that Aoko had been glaring at Shojiro the entire time. Glaring red-hot daggers, in fact. Not just at him, but the universe. Even on her best days, her roommate used to remark,
青子の視線は普通の人には厳しいわ。もう少し多くのことに寛大になるべきね。
she'd been warned that her emotions were so naked on her face that people treated her like a powder keg. How naive could the boy be that he couldn't pick up on this?
私をバカにしてるってわけじゃなさそうよね、この場合。
Even she found her own attempt to reassure herself unconvincing. It began to dawn on Aoko far too late that compared to her, this laid-back transfer student might as well have been from another planet.
いいわ。言葉にしないとわからないようだから言うけど、まるでじゃなくて、ズバリそうなの。あなたの気のせいじゃなくて、私は視線で遠回しに感情を表現してたの。いちいち声に出すのも、会話にするのも面倒だから。
In response to her words, the Martian clapped his hands together.
なるほど。どうしてそうしたいのかはわからないが、確かにそっちの方が手っ取り早い意思表現だ。
Shojiro accepted the reasoning without argument. Though he still had no idea what kind of emotion she was trying to express. It was as if he could hear the words but didn't grasp the meaning. Ideas that should have connected were instead separated into blocks.
確かにずれてるわ、こいつ。
Mr. Yamashiro's words made sense to her now. What was odd about this boy went way beyond naivete. A stranger in a strange land he may be, but this was only civilized to forgive him some jet lag-induced confusion.
じゃ、とりあえずあなたの教室に行くから。
She had regained her composure. Shojiro raised his hand and stopped in his tracks.
あと一つ。
Aoko waited for Shojiro to continue. The boy was patient to a fault. She rubbed her forehead with her hand again, nursing a vague feeling of uneasiness.
これもちょっとした疑問なんだが、なんで君は怒ってるんだ？怒るのが商売とか、そういう家柄の人なのか？
Oh shit. That was probably the wrong question. Oh man. A long silence. Though she knew it wouldn't change the situation, she remembered her regret at answering the phone this morning. He meant no harm. She repeated this thought like a mantra in an attempt to keep her impulses in check.
別にあなたのせいじゃないから気にする必要はないわ。ただ、この一瞬とお昼まで眠っていた場合を計りにかけたら、あまりに利益の違いがあって頭を抱えただけよ。
I mean, I can't say as I blame her much. With that vague answer, she started to walk again. and turned her gaze away from this rude stranger named Shujiro Suzuki. While that constitutes normal is certainly up for debate, most undoubtedly referred to him as so. He was a simple and nice boy with nondescript features. If he were an ice cream flavor, he would be vanilla. And Shujiro found Aoko to be the very businesslike and full of life. There was a certain purpose to her movements as they began and ended in an orderly fashion. The way her fingers raised when she pointed at things, the way she made her way across the hallway in classrooms, the way she would occasionally glance back at him to make sure he was keeping pace. Each and every movement was so impressive that he couldn't take his eyes off her. Aoko showed him to his homeroom class C of the 11th grade. The room certainly displayed more of a human touch than the previous meeting room, but Shujiro was none the wiser to its function. Aoko gave a brief explanation before they visited individual subject classrooms, as well as the gym, cafeteria, locker room, and school infirmary. Shujiro asked so many questions that much time passed before they reached the AV room on the second floor.
まずいな。
Shujiro stopped looking genuinely concerned.
あと20分経つと1時だ。
嘘でしょ？うちの校舎そんな広くないわよ。
The tour had begun around 10, which meant 3 hours had passed. A tour of a school shouldn't take anywhere near this long.
そうだったわね。行く先々で根掘り葉掘り聞かれちゃ、そりゃ何時間でも経つわ。日が暮れていないのが不思議なくらいね。
Aoko glared at Shujiro. She was being sarcastic, of course, knowing full well he'd never pick up on it. To her surprise, he looked down apologetically, unable to hide his dejection.
なんだこいつ。ちゃんとしてるっちゃ。
The guy before her now was nothing like earlier. In contrast to seeing his once impenetrable veneer, when they first met, she found herself feeling sympathetic. Momentarily, at least, until her irritation returned in full force.
で、何がまずいの？覚えることが多すぎてパンクしたなんて言わないでね。
いや、それもあるけど、学校のことは別にして1時になるとまずいんだ。
Wait, hold up. He didn't deny his brain wasn't big enough to remember all of this? Oh boy. Wow. Shujiro's gaze wandered as if worried about something. If he was worried about the weather, he would have a hard time seeing it as there were no windows in this hallway.
へえ、時間を気にするってことは用事があるのね。そう。人の予定を引っかき回しておいて、自分だけ好きなようにやろうって言うんだ。 なんだ、顔に似合わずいい人ね、君。
いや、褒めても何も出ないぞ。
Oh man, straight over his head.
誰も褒めちゃいないわよ。
Yeah, no, not a compliment. Oh man, Aoko's face. I love it. She reminds me of Rin Tosaka so much. She yelled at him, unable to hold back her fury.
で、
で、
それで、一体何の用なの？
Shojiro's face lit up as if he finally understood what she was asking him.
そこは秘密にしておきたい。
Oh boy. He said with a perfectly straight face.
慣れ始めたつもりだったけど、こいつのこういったテンポには失神しそうになるわ。
Her frustration was natural. Still, she did everything she could to stifle her feelings and fake a smile.
しずきくん？
Uh-oh. She took a step forward.
秘密だってば。
Feeling the mood change drastically, Shujiro took a step back. And another, and another. No matter how many steps he took back, she kept edging toward him. She was smiling, but he thought he could see the blood boiling beneath her skin.
これ、最後の質問にしとくわね。あなた、私をからかって楽しい？
He had no intention of mocking her, though at this point, he doubted presenting any evidence to prove this would do much to erase that forced smile on her face.
わかった。説明する。
His arms raised in surrender. She halted her advance and freed her face from that unseemly smile.
実は1時からアルバイトがあるんだ。でもここはそういうの禁止なんだろ？
そうだけど、あ、禁止されてるから秘密にしようと思ったの？バカね。それなら許可さえ下りていれば問題ないわよ。
知ってる。試験の時に許可はもらってる。
What is it you're...
へえ。
Aoko's face lit up as she realized he might not be the piece of work she thought him to be. Yet...
しかし、許可は一つしかもらえなかった。
一つって、あなた掛け持ちでバイトしてるの？
これでも2件減らしたんだ。
Wait, he had 4 friggin' jobs? Holy shit.
生活費だけで大変なのに、学費まで稼がなくちゃいけない。なのに働き先は一つだけというのはあんまりだと思わないか？
いや、あんまりなのはあなたの方だと思うけど。
Though still irritated, her opinion of him changed. A little. She was impressed that he was able to take care of his tuition and living expenses all on his own. She could also empathize with having no time to oneself. Her anger began to subside. The words part-time job were about the last thing she'd ever expected to hear out of this country boy's mouth.
そういうことなら仕方ないわね。いいわ、行きなさいよ。事情は分かったから。
青崎はいいのか？
He had no idea what this question meant, but she at least understood he was trying to be considerate, which also took her by surprise. She figured he'd been just as dense about people's feelings as he was about everything else.
別に私もこのまま帰るから。
First, though, she thought it'd be best they both stop by the faculty room. Mr. Yamashiro had mentioned that the transfer procedures had already been completed, so all that remains for him to sign off on her so all that remained was for him to sign off on her duties.
先生、案内終わりました。
それはお疲れ様。しずきくんもお疲れ様。それで校舎を回った感想はどうかな。
ありがとうございます。なんというか、とても学校ですね。
It's like a real school. Oh man, that's awesome. Jeez.
そうかそうか。うん、明日から頑張りなさい。
She had no interest whatsoever in this pointless wrap-up meeting.
山城先生のことは気にしないでいいわ。教え子に厄介なことを押し付けてふんぞり返っているぐらい職員室が好きなんだから、何時間でも待ってるでしょ。いえ、待ってるべきじゃない？
そうか。青崎がいいんならいいんだな。
ん？
There it was again. Whatever Shojiro was getting at, Aoko had no idea.
それじゃあ行くよ。今日はありがとう。
今日だけよ、今日だけ。
She shooed him away with her hand. His face bent into a broad smile, as if he found the gesture endearing. It was a softer expression than she had grown accustomed to seeing out of him. It was the kind of smile that would make anyone smile back. Well, most people at least. Aoko Awazaki didn't betray the slightest hint of a smile.
それじゃあまた。
は？
And with that friendly farewell, Shojiro walked toward the end of the hallway. Or so she thought before he turned into the next class over. Shojiro headed straight for one of the classroom's windows. Whereupon he opened it with ease. The chilly November air filled the room as soft sound of rain doubled in volume. In that instant, she realized his intention with opening the window. She really wished she hadn't.
いや、待て待て待て！
He already had one leg out the window when she dashed to stop him.
何するつもりよ、あんたは！
何ってアルバイトに行くんだけど。
From the, second floor window?
その窓は人が出入りするところじゃないの。だいたいここ何階だと思ってるの？
She saw the light of understanding dawn in his eyes.
死ぬところだった。2階から降りたら危なすぎる。
危ないのはあんたの頭。
Her insult went right over his head.
あのね、こっちじゃ窓から人は出入りしないの。さっき言っとくべきだったわ。
知ってるよ。時間がないんで慌ててたんだ。 ありがとう。これからは気をつける。
Seriously, he was doing it just to save time? What the hell? That's effing nuts. He pulled his leg back inside and closed the window. His school uniform was soaked wet from the rain.
いいけど、私は別に。あなたがどこから外に出ようが関係ないもの。ただ、できれば私の前ではやらないでほしいだけよ。それより、あなた、本当に明日から学校に来るの？
来るよ。不安だけど案内してもらったし。
He bid her farewell before running away down the hall. She hoped he would walk down the stairs and leave through the school entrance like a normal person.
はあ、大丈夫なのか？あんなんで。
The image of him disappearing into the distance popped into her head in spite of her ire. She had no intention of spending any more time with him, and yet she felt strangely anxious. She couldn't tell if the feeling was fueled by concern or irritation. Why had she even gotten angry with this insignificant transfer student in the first place? A strange day with a strange transfer student resulting in strange emotions. Her head tilted as she reflected on what she should have done, on what should have been a more enjoyable day than the irritating experience she just had.
いっか。どうせこれっきりなんだし。
The sound of the rain echoed quietly all around her. The gray skies seemed frozen in time. It was impossible to discern whether it was morning or evening. Mr. Yamashiro and Aoko were likely the only ones left at school. The unlit classroom looked overly gloomy and ominous as Aoko stood in it alone. She pulled up her left sleeve. Her dainty, unremarkable watch showed that it was almost 1 o'clock.
時間、合ってる。
She looked out the window at the grounds below. She saw a boy in a uniform running through the rain without an umbrella, a sight she must have seen before, but for whatever reason affected her far more than she wished. Hey, well, I'm going to be wrapping this stream up in about 20 minutes, guys. Aoki did not stop by the faculty room before heading home. While Mr. Yamashiro's offer to drive her home was tempting, she decided it would ultimately be far more satisfying to ruin his day just as he had ruined hers. She walked as quietly as she could toward the entrance and opened her bright red umbrella. As she had predicted that morning, the rain was waning in the afternoon. At this rate, it would probably cease completely in an hour or so. The distant sunshine would likely have reached her by the time she arrived home.
ま、それも悪くないか。
She shrugged her shoulders in resignation. She neither liked nor disliked rain, but she found herself enjoying her walk home with her red umbrella in her hand. The teachers at Misaki High School were fond of bright colors, so Aoko's red umbrella was an unusual sight. Or weren't fond of bright colors, my bad. A ghost story about how the umbrella was once pure white had been making the rounds, but it featured Aoko instead of a ghost. It was with that umbrella that she made her way toward Mizaki Station. Mizaki Private High School took its namesake from the town it was in. The area was once a sprawl of farmland and woodland, but rapid growth over the last 10 years had led to unprecedented modernization. Wow. There were some who fought to preserve Misaki's natural treasures.
残すことには賛成ですが、それでは残すだけになってしまうでしょう。
With those words, the mayor snuffed out the voices of the minority and ushered in a long-term plan for new urban development. More than enough funds for the umbrella development were collected, or urban development, wow. And the unassuming town of Misaki became the largest municipality of Misaki City in merely 10 years. Even though it lacked the modernity of neighboring Yashirogi or the elegance of Misaki Hills.
それも当然よね。どういじくってももともとが山中の宿場町だし、山ごと切り崩すって言うんなら別だけど。
Urbanization had been contained to the lowlands around the station, with most of the hills and mountains still standing as they did 10 years prior. The exhaustion of funds succeeded in protecting old Misaki where the citizens could not. It became a truly odd suburban town, welcoming an increasingly urban population with its vestiges of old country charm. Misaki High School was a private school established long before the town's current state. The original campus, built 50 years ago, was located high up in the mountains, making its current location its second incarnation. The path to the old grounds was not only steep and remote, it had become overgrown. It had become an overgrown game trail with the passage of time. For these reasons, among others, Misaki High School had been shuttered until almost 20 years ago, when it received a donation from a department store chain that allowed for the construction of a new campus in the city. And thus, Misaki High School reopened its doors, the old woodland campus forgotten. In fact, most of the students attending Misaki High School were not from Misaki at all. The hearty, rustic people of the country town preferred prefectural schools to private ones. Truth be told, Aoko herself was one of them. All she had wanted after junior high was to move to Tokyo, where she hoped to spend her days touring her favorite bands on the way to entering a public university. But her hopes were dashed with her sister's departure. So here she was, walking alone in a town with only a red umbrella to keep her company on what should have been a day off.
思い返してみると、私の人生ってなんか災難続きっぽい。
Her frustration evaporated into the cold December air.
でもいっか。退屈だけはしないわけだし。
With those words, her mood brightened a bit as she left the school in her wake. The busier part of town met her at the bottom of the gently sloping road. Mizaki train station was brand new. Once looking no prettier than an abandoned factory, it had been renovated into a multi-purpose structure with huge department stores on its east and west sides. When the department stores first opened, Aoko and her friends had been impressed with their modern feel, but in time, the stores too became dated. She had no shopping to do today, so she passed them by. What she really wanted to do was rest at a cafe, but she fought the urge, knowing her roommate would never let her hear the end of it if she fretted away her money. She looked back and blinked. For just a moment, she could have sworn she had seen someone suspicious in a red dress out of the corner of her eye. It must have been her imagination. The sixth sense chill she was experiencing down her spine was a familiar one at this point. She continued her walk home, brushing off the event as if it had never happened. In time, the chill faded, and all was left was the sounds of the town. She sighed heavily. Had she imagined it? Even if it had been in her head, she was far from comfortable with the feeling that still lingered.
夏場の方ってもう少しこう。
She grumbled under her breath.
波乱万丈、商売繁盛、諸行無常と。そうそう、忙しさに愚痴を言っても始まらないわ。
Unfortunately, summer and bugs go hand in hand. She could see how bugs could be drawn to all the sweet fruit. Not entirely sure what that has to do with anything, but all right. Rank with grease and heat, the kitchen was closed for the time being. The lunch rush had come and gone. But one last battle remained, dinner time. Only after the evening chaos could the kitchen crew remove their white armor and call it a day. In the midst of the war zone was a lone newcomer.
これ着るんですか？
His voice was uneasy, betraying how new he was.
気持ちはわかる。俺もどうかと思うけど、店長の言うことだから、もう笑顔で乗り越えてくれ。これも商店街の明日のためなんだとよ。本気で申し訳ないんだが、雨も止んだし、なんとか行ってきてくれないか？ 無事帰ってきたら晩飯おごってやっから。
His bright orange co-worker clasped his hands together as if to beg for forgiveness as he saddled him with this unreasonable task. "10 years ago, Misaki City was a town of farm and woodland. But everything had changed. The front of the station was now lined with tall, multi-story buildings. The residential area was similarly full of apartment complexes. The once rustic scenery around the station had long become a thing of the past." Hironozuka was the only place in the city that still contained vestiges of the old town, a pocket of the past inside an urban jungle. The road extended up a conspicuously high hill to an old residential district far from the hustle and bustle of the train station. Long ago, it had been considered unwise to build on high ground, so nobody lived above certain elevation. Shironozuka, sitting as it did atop a hill in the middle of a town, was no exception to that convention, and had no residence to speak of. The asphalt continued for some time, eventually giving way to a mountain road that was swallowed in the cover of trees. A lone vending machine stood to mark the boundary between town and beyond. Even the children knew that there was nothing beyond the new playground in development that so entirely enthralled them. Well, that was not entirely true. There was nothing besides the haunted house. Aoko Awazaki traversed the long slope. Below her, she could see the whole of Mizaki. The symmetrical town looked like a miniature set from this height. It would look like a painting if there had been a sea next to it, but unfortunately, Mizaki City was very much landlocked. While it was overcast at the moment, the scene was quite breathtaking on clear evenings. The view was the one thing that made the arduous climb worthwhile, and today she had been denied even that.
雨の日は自転車も使えないし、1日に2回ぐらいバスでも通ってくれないもんかな、ほんと。
Aoko had been using the road to get to school for almost 2 years now, but the journey had never gotten easier.
あれ、鍵閉まったまま？アリス、まだ帰ってきてないんだ。
With a weary shrug, she put her hand on the rusty iron fence. Quietly, the heavy gate swung open as if to welcome her home. There sits atop that hill a haunted house. This is how the story, much shared around town, used to begin. But fresh rumors about the house had sprung to life almost as fast as the town's modernization. Despite being dilapidated and abandoned for many years, lights can be seen inside the house at night. An angry murderer of crows gathers at the top of the hill before mysteriously vanishing. Children get lost in the fog, never to be seen again. Late at night, a shrieking sound can be heard all the way to town. This particular piece of slander was the one Aoko wished to discredit the most. The final rumor of a one-eyed catching luxury car that sometimes made its way up and down the hill. The rumors spread and grew day by day. And while they grew, the house that everyone thought had rotted away was restored over the recent years. Deep in a wood on top of a hill, no one dared to approach. Like a ruin shrouded from view, even on the brightest of days, stood a relic out of time, a building from a fairy tale. The house. Was the Kwanji Mansion. Everyone in town knew about the witch's house on the hill. It was an unabashedly haunted house where Aoko Awazaki resided for reasons known only to her. Needless to say, it was not really haunted. The Kanjiro family home was a grand Western-style mansion with a long and storied history stretching all the way back to England. It was too small to be a dormitory and yet too big to be called a house. The main building contains as many as 3 normal houses worth of rooms and was surrounded by a large, all-encompassing courtyard. The perimeter of the grounds was surrounded by a high iron fence covered in thorny vines. There was also an annex to the main building. Given such extravagance, it was no wonder that it inspired rumors. The town's residents, the mere existence of such a lavish and out-of-place mansion on top of a hill was a cause for suspicion. Rumors, lies, and slander were the price to be paid for fame. With only 2 lodgers, it was hard to disagree with the perception that vampires must be living here.
ま、私はともかく、アリスはそういうのやりかねないし。
She put her hand on the front door. It was a grand double door that would have paired well with a brass lock, and yet it was secured with little more than a simple keyhole. Pushing open the door with one hand, she entered the supposedly haunted house. And by the way, if vampires were not enough to scare you, ghosts were known to appear on certain nights. All right, well, we're going to call this one here for now. I hope everyone enjoyed the story thus far. I know it's kind of gotten off to a bit of a slow start. Hopefully it picks up fairly soon. All right, well, we should be having an episode of One Piece Odyssey coming out on Sunday. And some more Fate Samurai Remnant on Friday. Our next stream will probably be either Thursday or Friday. I'll figure that out in a couple days, and it'll be posted, and for you guys, so you know when the next stream is. All right, everyone. Well, have a great evening. We'll see you in the next one. Bye for meow.